Obviously, one of the key things people are looking for going into the US or just building a business full stop is around sales. So I really want to use the remainder of our time this morning to kind of lead off with Ash. And I think one of the most common questions we've had right through the history of the pad and just talking to anyone in general is getting the right sales model. And, you know, sales in some ways is obvious, in other ways it's actually pretty complex, and there's a lot of kind of holes that you can go down depending on the product or the service that you're selling. One of the biggest things I think that we don't hear a lot about in terms of comparing different alternatives is inside sales. Hands up who's kind of got the concept inside sales in their business today? Thinking about it, know what it is versus normal sales? Yeah, cool. So I think it's a good one to kind of jam on. So maybe Ash, if you can just open up, I mean, what is inside sales versus kind of sales as we normally know it?
I'm going to stand up because my legs are falling asleep. All right. So inside sales, first of all, it's a nebulous definition, and depending on who you ask, even in San Francisco, you could ask two people in the same company even and get two very different definitions as to what inside sales is. So I'll give you a couple of different definitions, and I'll also give you the one that I think is the most apt definition. First of all, inside sales at many organizations, they just call it, or they call inside sales the function of selling inside the office. So over telephone, WebEx, or GoToMeeting, some sort of video conferencing, show the product. Not a whole lot of time, flying and meeting customers and shaking hands in person. More so, salespersons who are inside your office for the most part, taking meetings and phone calls and closing deals from their seat. That is different from outside sales, where again or field sales, as it's often called, where people are out meeting customers. This is typically more so the case when you're selling to large enterprises or government agencies, longer, more complex, more hairy sales cycles that really require that face-to-face kind of interaction. Another definition of inside sales is, who here is familiar with the term sales development and what it means? Okay, so sales development is sometimes also called account development or business development, although I don't think that's the right term because business development implies partnerships to most people, so let's forget I ever said business development. But account development, sales development, or market development, what that often means is basically folks who are doing lead qualification or outbound prospecting, getting customers or prospects to come to you and take a meeting with an account executive who then will take that customer all the way through the rest of the journey to ultimately signing on the line, which is dotted. So again, it's kind of the first half of the sales cycle is oftentimes referred to as inside sales. For the most part, what I refer to as inside sales, Optimizely, and many other organizations in the Bay Area, Silicon Valley area, refer to as inside sales is the latter, where it's again folks who manage the first half of the sales cycle, either doing outbound prospecting, going after strategic accounts that we know are, hey, they're likely going to be a good fit for what we sell, or the team that takes leads that are generated by marketing, whether through paid online advertising or social, leads that come in, they turn those leads, they basically filter out the bad leads, ones that we feel, hey, there's probably not a good likelihood that this will ever turn into long-term revenue for the company. They filter those out and then pass along all of the opportunities that are likely to turn into opportunities to the AEs, to the account executives.
So I think one of the things people don't understand, Ash, which would be good to sort of preface, I mean, how much revenue do companies generate out of an inside sales team, and what's the sort of time to look at a model that's more inside sales than field sales?
Yeah, that's a great question. There are a couple of rules of thumb that you should apply if you're looking at having an inside sales team, as opposed to just one account executive or salesperson who handles the entire cycle. One is, what is the average time to close a deal? What is your average deal length? If your deal length is anywhere under 10 days, I would say it's probably not worth it to have one person who manages the introduction and then another person who handles the close. It's just the cost of acquiring a customer at that point becomes really, really high, and it's just not worth the squeeze. Another thing is, what does the actual, what is your average annual contract value for a deal closed? If it's anywhere under $5,000 a year, American dollars a year, so six, I don't know, I'm not going to do the math.
7,500 or so?
There we go, 7,500. Thank you, Savannah. If your average order value is around there or less, it's not worth it to have an inside sales rep or a sales development rep queue it up and pass it on to an AE. And then depending on really your volume of inbound interest. So if you have a fantastic marketing team that is generating just a ton of interest. I mean, we get, to give you some idea of what I'm talking about, at Optimize, we get about 20,000 inbound leads a month. So that's why I have a team of 35 sales development reps who comb through those leads, filter out the bad ones. We also have, we've invested heavily in predictive analytics and lead scoring tools such as Infer that score the likelihood of a lead turning into a customer. And if it's below a certain threshold, it doesn't even go to a human being. It automatically goes to a marketing queue where we nurture that and hope to get them on a path to buy one of our self-serve products. It's just not worth our time. But so if you have that kind of inbound interest, maybe not 20,000 leads a month, but even if you have 4,000, 3,000 leads a month coming into you, it may be worth it to look at having an inside sales team, again, depending on what your average order value is.
Yeah, so that's pretty big numbers, and I know that might seem not super sensible to focus on right now in terms of where you're at with your early stage company, but I think the point, and I might get Scott to comment on it, is when you're sitting trying to convince people to go on this journey with you from a company point of view, they're going to want to understand how you scale. And when they look at the fact that you might have been successful in Wellington or then in New Zealand, they want to know how you're actually going to sustainably, to your point, do that from a cost of acquisition basis on a big time. Scott, do you want to kind of give maybe an investor perspective on that?
Yeah, I think that was an awesome point on like what are the thresholds at which it makes sense to have these different sales processes or distribution strategies, basically. And I think it's awesome if you get some early traction, early revenue. And I think the question is, whether you're trying to bring on employees who are really savvy and understand the business that you're building or investors. The question's not just going to be, well, okay, how many customers do you have? How much revenue do you have? That's a great start. But if you're getting, if you close like $1,000 contracts through sales that cost you $5,000 to conduct, like the unit economics don't work out there. And so I think it's really important to think from like day one, how are we structuring the distribution strategy or the sales process to actually match up with what we think customer willingness to pay and customer margin is going to be, so that we know, hey, once we prove our model, we're really ready to pour fuel on the fire, and it's going, and now it's just time to grow that, as opposed to, okay, we've gotten some initial product market fit, we haven't really figured out distribution yet, like we have some ways of doing it, but it's not going to be profitable, so we still have a lot of business risk. I think it's more about resolving that business risk early and understanding what your distribution model is going to be over the long term than it is just trying to get revenue right away. So I'd really prioritize against figure out the answers to these really important questions before just trying to scale.
Just around, you mentioned in your overview, you made a few mistakes along the way from a sales perspective. Can you kind of share maybe the top 2 or 3 that you'd recommend avoiding or not doing?
Oh man, where do I start? A lot of these mistakes were much more painful because it took us so long to correct them than they were just bad ideas. I think one of the important things is, and I'm sorry to dodge the question a bit here, play politician, but I think one of the important things to keep in mind as an entrepreneur or as a small business owner or member is don't be afraid to make mistakes. You're going to make mistakes. There's risk exists in everything that you do. Go with your gut sometimes. Wherever possible, use data to drive your decision making, but just go and iterate along the way. Have that Kaizen kind of school of thought of like just improving as you go. So don't worry about efficiencies early on. Have a few folks do everything, jacks of all trades, whatever you want to call them, and then figure out how you can gain efficiency as you go. A couple of A couple of mistakes we made early on is there's a great book by a guy named Aaron Ross. It's a short book. I'd highly recommend it, called Predictable Revenue. And in it, he talks about how to scale a sales organization or basically grow a company. He talks about the early days of Salesforce.com, where the kind of the bellwether in the SaaS community and the pioneer and trailblazer in many ways. And he talks about this idea of there are seeds, nets, and spears in terms of how you gain distribution. Seeds is very, very crucial to the early stages of growing a company. It's basically the word of mouth marketing, right? So the founders know some people, they know some investors, the investors know some people, talk about the product, get some demos, close some deals, get some quick wins, go, 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 go. And it's viral. And viral growth is huge. It can be huge for any small growing company, but it's not sustainable. You're not gonna, most companies at least, aside from maybe Slack and a few others, don't grow to massive sizes.
Not everyone's a unicorn.
Yeah,
and that's okay.
Not everyone's a unicorn. So really what you have to do once you kind of get that past that first stage of growth is start investing in nets and spears. And nets, for lack of a better way to say it, is just marketing efforts as most people think of it: demand generation, lead generation, paid online advertising, basically getting people to come to you through your digital channels, events, things like this. The idea of a net is, it just goes broad, but it's not very specific with who it brings back. So it can be costly to bring a bunch of leads to your website if those leads don't convert. But with that said, you're better off bringing a bunch of leads to your website and then letting the salespeople figure out which are worth it and which aren't. And lastly is spears. Spears is much more of a kind of a sniper type approach, very specific. Hey, that is my target customer right there, and I'm not going to wait for her to come to me. I'm going to go after her and tell her why she needs to buy our product, so on and so forth. This is a very costly endeavor, but it can be very rewarding. And it shouldn't be, this is the mistake we made, finally getting back to your question, John. The mistake that we made is we didn't invest in spears or outbound prospectors until relatively late in the game, about February of last year. It was when we hired our first outbound sales team members. Before that, we were relying on those 20,000 leads a month that we were very, very fortunate to have. But the problem with those nets, the leads that come from marketing, is over time they will go down. You can't rely on them to continue to come in at the same rate and have the same efficacy level for long periods of time. Things change, the market changes. So it took us quite some time to finally invest in outbound salespersons. When we did, it was very successful. We've since grown that team from 3 people to almost 25 people globally. So it's been fantastic, but it took us a long time, and there was definitely a lot of missed revenue along the way.
Thanks. We're going to start sort of wrapping up the morning session now. I mean, maybe just a quick kind of wrap comments or thoughts that have come to hand from the speakers just around sales generally as we sort of move to lunch.
Yeah, I've got a quick question. You mentioned globally you have this many salespeople. How many offices do you have, and how do you manage across these different offices?
Yeah. Great question. So we have, let me see here, San Francisco, New York, Amsterdam, London, Cologne, Germany, Tokyo, Japan, and we'll have Sydney here shortly. So it's 7. I lost count as I was talking. About 7 offices globally. I have teams in 4 of those offices, and I have managers basically manage each of the teams in those offices. So it's a little bit more complex than that. It's actually, we have our inbound sales team, a team of 6 people now. We've shrunk that team tremendously, who does nothing but qualify those inbound leads and pass them to the right place or pass them over to AEs for demos. Then we have our outbound teams. We have 2 outbound teams in the States. One outbound team goes after strategic mid-market accounts, and the other outbound team goes after strategic enterprise accounts. And the promotion path is we hire someone fresh out of school who maybe has or at most maybe a year of sales experience. We hire them as an inbound SDR. They learn the ropes. They learn how to deal with high volumes, manage pipelines, and then they graduate to mid-market outbound rep, where they learn how to bring something in from scratch and turn it into an opportunity, and then promote them to an enterprise outbound rep who learns more so that enterprise play, how to multi-thread, how to go to a CMO with one value proposition, then a director of analytics with another. And then once they finally graduate from the inside sales organization, having gone through that tour of duty, they become an account executive. So I have managers who manage the mid-market team, enterprise team, and the inbound team separately.
I got a question for you. We didn't get into this at all yesterday. How do you manage incentivizing that team? I think that's an interesting topic for folk here. The US may be a little bit different to New Zealand on that front.
I didn't want to open up a can of worms when John asked me what some of the mistakes we made along the way are around compensation and incentives, but that's a really tough one. I still don't know exactly where I stand on a lot of these questions. The important thing to ask yourself is, are my incentives aligned with my company objectives? That's the biggest thing you want to be thinking about at all times and constantly try to iterate and improve on. With that said, so you don't want to pay someone for something that's not going to help you get to your company targets. So what I've actually done I'll let you know in maybe 3 months how this goes, is I've reverse engineered our company's objectives for 2016 down to the sales function level, and said, okay, cool, how is sales going to help the company get to that company objective of cash flow positivity by the end of 2016, right? So, okay, cool, this is what we're gonna do. This is the bookings target we're responsible for in 2016 that will allow us to get there. Also, here's the cost per head number that we wanna stay under in order to allow us to make this much money, but also not cost more than this much money. Cool. How does that flow into my department? Well, in order for us to have this bookings target, I know that we have a win rate of about 30%. Cool. If we have a win rate of about 30%, that tells me we need to generate about 3x what that bookings target is quarter over quarter. Cool. How are we going to do that? Well, I know that it takes about 100 cold calls for one of my reps to produce, 30 quality meetings. Therefore, they need to be doing this many cold calls per day, every day. And what that does is, number one, you're aligning, obviously, what I'm paying my team on with what the company's mission is. But also, it provides something that is just immensely important, which is called, what Justin Rosenstein from Asana calls clarity of purpose. Because if I go to one of my reps and I say to him, hey, you're making 100 calls today, that sucks. That's a hard job to do. And if I say, you're making 100 calls today, and I'm gonna tell you to do the same thing tomorrow, and by the way, it's not 100 calls, I'm not driving a slave ship, it's like 30 calls, so it's fine. But anyway, clarification. Yeah, no one cares. I'm not asking anyone to make 100 calls a day here, so no. Anyway. But the thing is regardless, it is a grind and it is tiring. But if I tell you to do this because I am your boss or I am your boss's boss and I'm telling you to do this, you're going to quit on me at some point, or you're just not going to work hard. You're going to lose your motivation to keep working. But if I tell you, hey, if you make this many calls a day, you will do this, which will in turn allow this to happen, which will in turn allow this to happen, which will in turn allow the company to hit its 2016 OKRs, which will hopefully get us to be public, and hopefully will get you to be a multimillionaire because of the equity you have in this company, so on and so forth. Suddenly, you have a much more motivated individual. And then the other thing that I'm still trying to master is figure out, how do I tie my ask of you, how many calls a day you're making, to your personal, individual, professional objectives, right? So you want to be an account executive in 1 year or 2 years, or you want to be a partnerships manager in this amount of time. Cool. What I try to do is I build a roadmap with deliverables along the way of, this is what you need to accomplish this month, this is what you need to accomplish that quarter, that year, in order to get to your goal. So I try to align company goals with human goals, as well as like the day-to-day mundane stuff, to really have things working in harmony.
Ash, how many touches do you have with some of your sort of bigger customers past that $5,000 mark to close a sale?
Touches, I couldn't tell you the number of touches. I'll tell you our average sales cycle is about 60 days for most of our customers.
I guess some of the feedback and what we've seen at the landing pad over the last sort of 5 years is that it generally can take up to 7 touches of just reaching out to people over and over and over again to like get a response, get the sale, get the meeting, those sorts of things. Or even I think just setting up the meeting, it can take that long. It's like a much longer process, and people say, no, maybe, okay, you're annoying me enough now that I might actually start paying attention.
Yeah, actually, funny story. Before I came here a couple weeks ago, a woman reached out to me completely cold. She actually did a great job. She hit me up on LinkedIn, added me on Twitter, and favorited a bunch of my tweets. She added me on Facebook, which I thought was kind of creepy. I didn't accept her friendship. Pushing it. Yeah. Friend zone. Anyway, but she did all these great things, and then she sent me a really thoughtful email, a cold email. I have no idea who this woman is. She says, "Hey, we know this person in common. I just added you on LinkedIn. I love that you wrote about this blog post, and all of these things. I'm really trying to cater to my ego, soften me up, and then ask me for what she wants, which is she basically she helps companies write better cold emails, right?" So she wants to come in and critique my company's, my team's emails and I don't know, I guess charge us for her services. And I was I was tempted to reply right away because it was actually a really good cold email and clearly she knows what she's doing. But I was like, hold up, let me not reply because most of the people we're reaching out to on the first attempt, they don't reply. They delete that email before they read 2 sentences, right? There's just a lot of noise. So I'm like, what is her follow-up cadence going to be? What is her second email going to look like? What is her third email? When does she reach out to me? And she never replied. She never reached back out. And I'm like, why would I ever invest in your services if you don't even write a follow-up email knowing that it's going to take you 5 to 7 touches before you ever get someone to reply to you? So anyway, I just thought I'd share that.
Scott, have you had any experience with that? You must get a few people, or is it surprising the number that you don't actually get in terms of repeated?
Yeah, I'd say most introductions that I get are introductions, or the way I get in touch with most people is introductions. I think, in the VC community, I think it's the expectation is it's an introduction. Cold emails, people usually don't respond to. Maybe after a lot of persistence, I think people might. After one email, certainly not. So if you're going to go that route, I would say you would need to make it really, really relevant. Probably have to follow up multiple times. But I think it can also be, for investors specifically, could be a bad strategy. And I'm sure if that person who emailed you, if she had actually gotten an introduction through someone that you knew, you would have said, well, okay, I'll meet with you.
You wouldn't have hesitated.
Right.
I do appreciate what you said earlier about asking for if it's okay to intro you to someone before you intro. So usually if someone that I don't know very well or just intros me to someone that I don't know at all and I have no interest in speaking to that person about the product they're selling or whatever it is very clear what they want, I kind of treat that as dude, why did you do this to me? You put me in this uncomfortable position.
Yeah, that person almost gets blacklisted, right?
Yeah,
it's even worse.
Yeah. And I've followed up with people and be like, hey man, can you ask me for these intros before you make them next time? So definitely a good bit of etiquette. Thank you for sharing that earlier. But yeah, I mean, if there is an intro from even someone I somewhat know, there's much more social pressure on me to reply and not be the bad guy. So she should have done that if she had a connection in common, which she did.
So maybe really quick thoughts on how to make that first hire, what you look for, what matters, and actually how you bring them along for the journey.
I got a good answer. Yeah. So kind of to the point of cold emails and following up, one of the best hires I ever made, my first hire at Shapeways. I worked at the 3D printing company. I'm not sure if the drilling situation drowned that out earlier. But so I got this email from this kid once, and it was, hey, I love your work. I followed your stuff. I love Shapeways, and I want to come work for you. And I thought, okay, this is cute. I happened to be kind of looking for an intern at the time, but I thought I had figured out who I wanted to hire. And the next day I woke up and there was another message saying, hey, I just wanted to let you know, I'm really, really focused, and I noticed this new blog post of yours, and I thought that was really interesting. I thought, okay. And I didn't respond, and I was actually traveling in Holland at the time and kind of thought, oh, whatever, I'll worry about this when I get back to the States. And then I got a GChat the next time I got Wi-Fi. And he had figured out my personal GChat. And he said, hey, this is Eric Ho, and I'm really, really excited to talk to you, and I just want to let you know how excited I am. I saw you at Dutch Design Week, and have you checked out this exhibit because it looks really interesting? And I still didn't respond. Because at this point I was like, who the fuck is this kid? And why does he now at this point I'm almost like, this is encroaching on my personal space. And then the jet lag wore off. And I started to think about it, and I thought, whoa, this kid is really doing a good job. So he had transcended from my work email to my personal GChat, and then started engaging with me on Twitter about some of the things I was doing, and then independently started promoting Shapeways designers. And because he had contacted me, made such kind of a fuss, and then I was therefore paying attention to him, I saw that he was already doing sales for me without me hiring him. And I thought about his persistence, and I thought about his attitude, and he, to this day, is the top performer I've ever hired. It was, yeah.
Yeah, that's, if you ever get someone follow up with you like that, hire them as a salesperson. I mean, that's a no-brainer. I would have hired him after the G-Chat. But in terms of having a model or a kind of a persona built out for who you hire as your first set of salespersons and later on, first of all, realize it's going to change over time. The things we looked for at Optimizely early on in our company's growth are different than the things we look for in salespeople today. So one of the very important things to look for in your early hires in sales in particular is that entrepreneurial spirit or that hustle, that kind of self-starter mentality. Someone who's not going to wait around to like get direction or be told how to do something. Just someone who gets things done. And you can screen for those things. Oftentimes athletes are very good because they have that kind of just go get it done, that bias towards action mentality. But it doesn't have to be an athlete. Just look for success in people's resumes, whether that means they were valedictorian or they had a certain GPA or they were a walk-on. I don't know if they have walk-ons on rugby teams here, but like one of the things, it's just like that hustle of like determination of like against all odds, I'm going to get this done. And then some common things that you should always look for in salespersons are persuasiveness. So ask them questions like, Android or iPhone and why, or Android or iOS and why. And it doesn't matter what their answer is, but listen to how they persuade or don't persuade you. Wellington or Auckland, which one and why? Questions like that will just get Wellington, obviously. But the questions like that really do matter. And then lastly, coachability is really huge. The last thing you want is someone who's going to come in, even if they're great at what they do, if they go rogue and do things their own way and they're just not willing to budge and like adapt with the organization, it's gonna be hell managing that person and scaling a team while you try to manage that person's behaviors.
Yeah, I think I had the pleasure of working with a ton of very early stage companies, and we got into this discussion yesterday that one of the things that I always looked at in a company was they have to have the hacker and the hustler. Those are the two fundamental roles that when you are two people in a garage, you must have, right? You can't really outsource the hustling that well when you're tiny. You cannot outsource the hacking. I mean, some people do it, but eventually you got to find the person who's your hacker, right? And when you start to bring in employee 3, 4, 5, they really are partners with you still. They may be not your co-founders. And so one of the things that I've found it's the most critical thing is obviously they must be able to get beat down and stand back up and kind of it's almost the rugby analogy of hit the next ruck without even asking questions. But the communication is the most critical thing. They must be able to tell you the moment something isn't working, that it's not working, and they're not embarrassed to have that discussion with you. There are some folk, when things don't work out, they want to try and solve it by themselves and they go off into a vacuum. In a small early stage company, that is the worst thing that can happen. They must have the ability to realize that something's not working, I need to communicate and use the power of the rest of the team to solve that problem. When people go off into a vacuum in an early stage company, it just causes all sorts of havoc. So I'm always looking for somebody that literally doesn't mind getting beaten up, standing up, and then telling me that things aren't working.
Awesome. I think this is a really big topic, so I guess we can all take that offline. I think another trend that we've been seeing is that a lot of American companies actually hire from within their communities. So does anyone know Polyvore? So basically they are a marketplace platform, and they hired their CEO from one of their most active users who gave them a lot of feedback. And that's a really common trend in the US is hire your most passionate sort of promoters, and they make the best team because they already love you and they use you, and that can be a really good model. I think last thing that I want to touch on is we talk about this a lot at Sales Hacker. It's the sales playbook. So I guess what is the top of your sales playbook? Maybe just one thing across the board.
When you say top of our sales playbook?
just like what's your top like tool or tip or the one thing that's like your mantra with your playbook?
Yeah, one of the things, and I saw, I think, a question about this on Twitter. By the way, there are a couple questions that we didn't get to cover, so I'll find each of you offline, or let's find me offline and we can chat. One of the things that is really important for us at Optimizely is we're selling a product that doesn't, the need for, or the market for this product doesn't really exist yet, and it's still in its infancy in many ways, right? A/B testing, website optimization, website personalization. This is a relatively new thing. Most companies aren't doing it. So what we're doing is we're selling to companies that don't a product to companies that the companies don't yet realize they need. And that presents a challenge in and of itself. And I think Henry Ford, founder of Ford Motor Company, said it best when he said, "If I had asked people what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse." And the challenge with that is you have to do what's called Clayton Christensen will call agnostic marketing, where you're selling or marketing products not to speak to what your product does, but really more so. It speaks to what the problem is that you're solving for. And that's one of the things, once we realized that at Optimizely, that we were selling a product that people didn't yet realize they needed, then our sales cycle became much easier to close on, because we were then, instead of asking, hey, what are your goals for A/B testing, or what are your website optimization goals for the year, which were oftentimes met with blank stares, we were asking, hey, what are you trying to do as a marketer? What are your goals? What are you trying to get to? How are you going to get there? What obstacles stand in your way? And then we figured out, okay, cool, well, that's when we come in and we teach you. The education process is so vital here. Why what we're doing is going to help you, and it's going to help you get there faster and better. So in sum, like our playbook is it's all about teaching and learning. It's this constant loop in the early stages, in particular of a sales cycle, is learn from the customer and then teach. Learn, then teach. Position yourself as a subject matter expert, but also learn what they're trying to do first.
Never stop learning.
Never stop learning. Really important. Yeah. I mean, there's a whole lot in the sales playbook, but obviously we don't have a whole lot of time. That's probably the biggest one I'd say we focus on.
Yeah, my advice would be just pick a small market that you think you can own, and just focus on owning that and one specific customer segment. And once you do that, then move on and try and be more things to more people, or find your next segment. But just really focus on dominating one first and go from there.
Yeah, I think the name we have for what you just described is, we call them the trusted advisor. So you want your salesperson to be the trusted advisor with the client, and that includes advising the customer to buy someone else's product. It's one of the best things that you can teach a salesperson to do, because the customer will come back to you and ask things of that salesperson. They don't think of it as just transactional, it becomes a relationship. And if you get to that point with your sales staff, it can be really, really empowering, because you'll get so much information and data back out of your customers. They'll just keep coming back to this really knowledgeable person that's going to help them with their business, not just trying to pitch them something.
2 little tiny anecdotes. You touched on something, Ash, that's really interesting. In the, if you ask people what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse. That's innovation right there. Like, in a definition, it is giving people what they didn't know they wanted until you showed it to them. And that's sort of your job as a creative and as an entrepreneur, whether you're making a trash can, a life-saving medical device, or a new piece of SaaS software. Like, it doesn't matter, but be the shepherd of that mission. And in teaching that, they should feel empowered when they leave the sales call, not like they just spent money. They should feel better off for that buy. People want to feel great about that buy. And another thing, dude, I don't even know how this happened. Ears must be buzzing. I just got a text message from the guy I was describing about, asking me for 2 introductions, because he just left his job and wants to fall back on me again to move forward. And it's like, I'm sitting here chuckling, because I will go out of my way on this trip to introduce him to everyone because of what a performer he was. Ash, I don't know if you're hiring, but yeah.